The battlefield was silent now, but the silence was heavy, like the air after a storm. Burned ships lay scattered, broken weapons were buried in the mud, and smoke still rose from the ruins. Among the wreckage, soldiers moved like shadows, gathering what was left behind. And there she was, an alien girl, young and trembling, her wrists bound with rough rope. Her silver eyes were full of fear, but she held her chin high. The war had taken her family, her home, her freedom. Now she was nothing more than a prize. They called her spoils of war. The soldiers laughed, pushing her forward. She's nothing, worthless, just a captive. Their voices cut deep, but she said nothing. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to let them see her cry. Then one of the men stepped forward, a human soldier, tall and quiet, with tired eyes that carried the weight of too many battles. He did not laugh, he did not mock, he simply looked at her, and something in his gaze was different. "This one is yours now," another soldier sneered, shoving the rope into his hand. "Take her, do whatever you want, she's just spoils." The alien girl's breath caught. She had heard stories of what happened to captives. She braced herself for cruelty, for pain, for the chains of a new master. But the human only nodded and pulled the rope gently, guiding her away from the jeering crowd. Her feet stumbled over the broken ground as she followed him. She expected to be dragged, but his steps were slow, careful. She could not understand. Why wasn't he like the others? They walked past fires and ruins until the sounds of laughter faded behind them. The road was long and silent, broken only by the crunch of their boots. Every step felt like a step deeper into the unknown. At last they reached the edge of the camp. The human stopped and turned to face her. She tensed, waiting for the first cruel word. The first strike. But he only raised a hand and cut the rope from her wrists. Her eyes widened. The rope fell to the ground, and for the first time since her capture, her hands were free. She rubbed her sore wrists, confused. This had to be a trick. No captor would free a prisoner. "You'll walk beside me," he said quietly. His voice was rough from battle, but not unkind. She did not answer. She was too afraid. She followed him anyway. That night he gave her food. Not scraps, not leftovers, but the same bread he ate himself. She stared at it, unsure if it was real. When she finally took a bite, warmth spread through her chest, stronger than the food itself. She had been treated like dirt for days. Why was this man different? But fear still clung to her heart. She could not trust him, not yet. She lay awake on the cold floor of his tent, staring into the darkness. Her thoughts spun in circles. He had freed her wrists, fed her, treated her with dignity, yet he still held her life in his hands. Was this kindness only a mask? Would the cruelty come later? Her body trembled as the night stretched on, and she pulled the thin blanket tighter around herself. In her mind, the voices of the mocking soldiers still echoed. She's nothing, just spoils. But deep inside, a tiny spark refused to die. For the first time since her capture, she felt something she thought she had lost forever: hope. And as she closed her eyes, one thought echoed in her heart. This man was not like the others, not yet safe, not yet free, but something had begun to change. The morning came cold and gray. The alien girl woke to the sound of footsteps outside the tent. For a moment she forgot where she was, hoping it had all been a nightmare. But when her eyes opened and saw the rough cloth roof above her, reality cut through her chest like a blade. She was still a captive. She sat up slowly, hugging her knees to her chest. Her stomach turned in knots. What would this day bring? Would the man who had freed her wrists show his true colors? Would he remind her she was nothing more than spoils of war? The tent flap opened, and the human soldier stepped inside. He carried a small jug of water and a strip of dried meat. His face was calm, unreadable. He placed the food in front of her without a word. Her heart raced. She wanted to refuse, to keep her pride, but hunger burned in her stomach. Slowly, she picked up the food, her hands trembling, and ate. The man watched her quietly but said nothing. It was strange. Every other human she had met since her capture had mocked her, laughed at her pain, or treated her like dirt. But this man, his silence was heavier than words. "Why?" she whispered at last, her voice weak. "Why are you not cruel?" The soldier looked at her, his dark eyes steady. For a moment she thought he would answer, but instead he only shook his head and stood, leaving her question hanging in the air. Confusion swirled in her mind. She was still a prisoner. Her chains might be gone, but her freedom was not. The shame of captivity weighed heavy on her chest. She remembered her people's proud songs, the way they swore never to bow, never to break. Yet here she was, sitting in a human's tent, fed by a human's hand. Later, he motioned for her to follow. She hesitated but obeyed. They walked through the camp together. Soldiers stopped and stared. Some laughed, pointing at her. "Look at the prize he keeps," one sneered. "A little alien toy." "Why doesn't he chain her?" another mocked. "Too soft, too weak." The girl felt her cheeks burn. She lowered her head, shame pressing her down like iron. She wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but her legs felt heavy as stone. The soldier walked on, ignoring the others. He did not answer their insults. He only kept walking, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade, daring anyone to step closer. The girl's heart twisted. Why did he protect her from their mockery? She was nothing to him, a burden, a captive. And yet, in the crowd of jeering soldiers, he stood like a wall between her and the world. When they reached the edge of the camp, he stopped. He turned to her and spoke quietly. "You are safe with me." Her eyes widened. Safe? The word felt strange, almost painful. How could a captive be safe? But his voice was steady, and something in her chest stirred. She did not answer, afraid to believe. That night, she lay awake again, staring at the stars through a gap in the tent. Her wrists were free, but invisible chains still wrapped around her heart. Chains of fear, chains of shame, chains that whispered she would never be more than a prize taken in war. And yet, when she remembered the way he stood before the others, silent but unyielding, a question flickered in her mind. Was he her captor, or was he something else? The answer was not clear, but one thing was certain: her story was not finished. The road stretched far beyond the camp, winding through fields scarred by war. The human soldier walked ahead, silent as ever, while the alien girl followed. Her wrists were no longer bound, but every step still felt like she carried invisible chains. She did not ask where he was taking her. Captives had no right to ask, but fear coiled inside her chest. Perhaps he was leading her to another prison, another cage where she would rot unseen. Hours passed. The ruins of the battlefield disappeared behind them. Finally, they reached a small house at the edge of the hills. It was built of wood and stone, simple and quiet, far from soldiers and laughter. Smoke curled from the chimney and the door creaked when he pushed it open. The girl froze at the threshold. This was no prison. It was a home, but that made her heart beat even faster. Why had he brought her here? The soldier stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. His eyes were unreadable but not cruel. Slowly, hesitantly, she walked inside. The air was warmer here. A wooden table stood near the fire, a single chair beside it. Shelves lined the walls, holding a few books, tools, and jars of herbs. It was not grand, but it was clean. It felt alive in a way the camp never did. The girl's gaze darted around, searching for chains, for cages, for the proof that this was just another trap. But there were none. Only silence. The soldier set down his pack and handed her a blanket. "Rest," he said simply. His voice was low, steady, without command, but not quite gentle either. She clutched the blanket to her chest, unsure whether to thank him or remain silent. In the end, she said nothing. That night, she lay near the fire, the warmth soaking into her bones. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the creak of wood as the wind pressed against the house. It was too quiet. She could hear her own heartbeat, fast and less. Her thoughts twisted. Why bring her here? Why treat her like this? If he wanted power over her, there were easier ways. If he wanted cruelty, he had 1,000 chances already. Yet instead, he gave her food, warmth, and freedom to breathe. Confusion was worse than pain. Pain she understood. But this made her feel weak, uncertain. She turned her head toward him. He sat by the table, sharpening a blade in the firelight. His face was still, unreadable, shadows dancing across his scarred skin. He did not look at her, but somehow she felt his awareness. For the first time since her capture, she whispered her fear aloud. "Is this another cage?" The soldier's hand paused. He lifted his head slowly and met her gaze. His eyes, dark and tired, held no mockery. "No," he said after a long silence. "This is my home." Her throat tightened. A home. The word cut into her heart like glass. Her home was gone, burned to ashes. She had nothing left but the memories that haunted her dreams, and yet here he was, offering her space in his own. She did not believe him fully, not yet, but something inside her stirred again, a spark. As she pulled the blanket tighter, her heart whispered questions she dared not speak. Was she still a captive, or had she stepped into something else entirely? The fire crackled softly, and the silence pressed in around them. A silence not of chains, but of mystery. The days passed slowly inside the silent house. The alien girl still moved carefully, as if one wrong step might shatter the fragile peace. She ate the food he gave, sat by the fire when he told her to rest, and slept on the floor while he kept his distance. But in her heart, she was restless. Something was missing. To the soldiers, she had been captive, spoil, prize. Not once had they spoken her name. Even she had stopped whispering it to herself at night, as if silence could protect the memory of who she once was. Her name felt dangerous, like a flame in the dark, something that could be stolen and destroyed. One evening, the soldier set a bowl of soup on the table and motioned for her to eat. The warmth filled her stomach, but the silence between them felt heavier than the walls around her. Finally, he spoke. "What is your name?" The spoon froze in her hand. Her chest tightened. She lowered her eyes to the bowl, too afraid to answer. No one had asked her that since before the war. "You must have one," he said quietly, his gaze steady. Her lips trembled. Should she tell him? If she gave him her name, would he use it as a chain? Would he twist it like a weapon? For a long moment she sat in silence, the firelight flickering across her face. Then, almost too soft to hear, she whispered, "Lyra." The sound of it made her heart ache, her name, her true name. The soldier repeated it, his voice slow and careful. "Lyra." Her eyes widened. He did not mock it, did not sneer, did not laugh. He said it like it mattered, like it was real. Tears stung her eyes, but she turned her face away, ashamed of her weakness. She had promised herself never to cry before humans, yet here she was, shaking because one man had spoken her name as if it belonged to her again. From that night on, he called her nothing else. Lyra, when he handed her bread. Lyra, when he asked her to pass the water. Each time, the sound warmed her chest, though she tried to hide it. The shame of captivity still clung to her. She still feared the other soldiers, their cruel laughter, their voices echoing in her mind. But here, in this house, she was no longer spoil. She was Lyra again. One evening, she dared to test the silence herself. What is your name?" she asked hesitantly. The soldier looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Elias." She repeated it in her mind, like a secret. Elias. It was a strong name, but also tired, like the man who carried it. For the first time, the distance between them felt smaller. Two names spoken into the firelight, carried into the quiet house. Not captor and captive, but man and woman. That night, as she lay on the floor with the blanket around her shoulders, she whispered her name again into the darkness. Lyra. It did not sound broken anymore. She was not free, she was not safe. But piece by piece, she was becoming herself again, and somehow she knew it had started the moment Elias had asked her that simple question. The nights in Elias's house were quiet, but quiet did not mean peace. For Lyra, the silence was heavy, filled with ghosts. When she closed her eyes, she did not see the warm fire or the safe walls. She saw her village burning. She heard the screams of her people, the clash of blades, the roar of fire swallowing everything she loved. One night, the memories became too much. She woke with a cry, her body trembling, sweat running down her face. Her hands reached for someone who was no longer there. Her mother, her sister, gone. Elias stirred from the chair where he slept lightly with a blade by his side. His eyes opened at once, sharp with a soldier's reflex. But when he saw her curled on the floor, shaking, his expression changed. He did not rush with questions. He did not demand explanations. He simply stood and knelt beside her. Lyra flinched when she felt the weight of his hand touch her shoulder. For a moment, she thought he might strike her, but the touch was steady, calm, grounding. "You're safe," Elias said in his rough, low voice. The words felt fragile, like they could break at any moment, but she clung to them anyway. Her breath came fast and uneven, her body refusing to calm. "I saw it," she whispered, voice shaking. "The fire, the night they came. I heard the children scream. I couldn't save them." Her chest heaved, and the shame of helplessness poured out of her in broken words. She had buried it deep, but the dream tore it open again. Elias listened in silence. His hand did not leave her shoulder. He did not tell her to be strong. He did not tell her to forget. He simply stayed, his presence steady, like a stone in the storm. Slowly her sobs softened, her breath slowed. She turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes in the dim firelight. There was no pity there, no mockery, only understanding, the kind of understanding that came from someone who he had seen his own share of ghosts. "Why do you care?" she whispered. Her voice was small, almost breaking. "I am nothing. I am only a spoil of your war." Elias shook his head. His gaze was firm, unshaken. "You are not nothing." Her lips parted, but no words came. No one had ever said that to her since the war began, not even her own people, who looked at captives with shame and disgust. "You survived," Elias said quietly. "That means something." Lyra felt something stir inside her chest, something she thought had died long ago. For the first time in months, she felt seen, not as a prisoner, not as a prize, but as a person who still had worth. When morning came, her eyes were tired, but her heart carried a new weight she could not name. She moved through the house, helping quietly with small tasks, placing wood on the fire, filling the water jug, sweeping the floor. She did not know why she did it. Maybe it was gratitude. Maybe it was the faint hope that she could still belong somewhere, even if only in this silent house. That night, as she lay down by the fire once more, she whispered to herself before sleep claimed her, "I am Lyra." The past still haunted her. The flames, the screams, the broken pieces of who she once was. But now there was a voice stronger than the whispers of war. The voice of a man who told her she was not nothing. And though she still feared what tomorrow might bring, she clung to that one fragile truth. Days blended into one another inside the small wooden house. For Lyra, each morning began with the same question. What am I now? A captive? A guest? Or something else she could not yet name? She did not wear chains, but invisible ones still wrapped around her mind. Whenever Elias spoke, his words were short, clipped, never cruel, but never soft either. He was like the walls of the house itself, steady and strong, but hard to read. Still, something was changing. Lyra began to move more freely. At first, she only fetched water or stacked wood because it felt wrong to stay idle. But slowly, she found herself wanting to help. She cleaned the table, prepared small meals with what she knew of her people's herbs, and even mended one of his torn shirts with clumsy stitches. Elias never thanked her, but when she caught him wearing that same shirt the next day, the quiet acknowledgement was enough to warm her chest. One afternoon, she was sweeping the floor when Elias returned from hunting. He carried a rabbit slung over his shoulder. His boots were muddy, and his hair was tangled by the wind. He looked tired, but alive. "You should learn to cook it," he said, dropping the rabbit on the table. Her eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes," Elias replied simply. Lyra hesitated. She had cooked many times before the war, but never for a human. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared the meal, aware of his gaze on her back. She boiled water, added herbs she had gathered, and tried to ignore the pounding in her chest. When she finally placed the bowl before him, she sat nervously by the fire, waiting. Elias took a slow sip, his face unreadable. Then he set the bowl down. "It's good," he said. Her eyes widened. That was the first praise he had ever given her. For a moment, warmth spread across her cheeks, but then Elias added, "Too much salt." Her jaw dropped. "Too much salt?" "Yes." And his tone was serious, but his eyes flickered with something she had never seen before, something almost playful. She narrowed her eyes. "Then cook it yourself." The words slipped out before she could stop them. For a heartbeat, fear stabbed her chest. Had she gone too far? Would he punish her for speaking back? But Elias only raised an eyebrow. "Maybe I will." The silence that followed broke her control. Against her will, a small laugh escaped her lips. It was soft, almost fragile, but real. The sound startled even her. She had not laughed since before the war. Elias looked at her, his face still calm, but his eyes softened. "There it is," he murmured. "What?" she asked, confused. "A smile," he said simply. Lyra touched her lips, realizing they were curved. A smile, her first in months. She wanted to hide it, but it was too late. It was there, alive and undeniable. The fire crackled, and for the first time the silence of the house did not feel heavy. It felt warm. That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, Lyra whispered to herself, "I smiled." It was such a small thing, yet to her, it felt like the breaking of chains. In the darkness, she realized that hope was no longer just a spark. It was beginning to grow. And though fear still lingered, she knew something had shifted between them. The girl who had been called spoils of war was slowly finding pieces of herself again, pieces Elias had unknowingly returned to her. The days in the quiet house passed like ripples on still water, but peace never lasted long. One evening, the silence was broken by heavy knocks on the door. Lyra froze where she stood, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Elias glanced at her, his face hardening, before he moved to open the door. 3 soldiers stood outside, the same men she remembered from the camp. Their laughter was sharp, their eyes full of arrogance. "Well, well," one of them sneered. "So this is where you've been hiding, Elias, keeping your prize all to yourself?" Lyra's stomach twisted. Their eyes crawled over her like chains. She wanted to shrink into the shadows, but there was nowhere to hide. Another soldier stepped forward, grinning. "You don't need to play the noble man. She's spoils of war. Everyone knows what captives are for. Why pretend?" Lyra's breath hitched. The shame she thought she had left behind surged back like a wave. Her hands shook and she wrapped her arms around herself, bracing for the cruelty she knew too well. But Elias stood firm in the doorway, blocking their path. His voice was calm, but it carried iron. "She is under my roof. She is not yours." The soldiers laughed. "Not ours? Come on, Elias, don't act righteous. You think keeping her fed makes you better than us? She's a toy, nothing more." One of them reached past Elias, trying to grab her wrist. Lyra flinched, her body trembling, but before the hand could touch her, Elias's blade flashed. Steel sang as he pressed the tip against the soldier's throat. The laughter stopped. Silence filled the doorway. Elias's voice was low, steady, dangerous. "Touch her again, and you won't leave this place alive." The soldier stiffened, his grin fading into a snarl. "You'd threaten your own brothers for her?" "She is not spoils," Elias said, his eyes dark and unyielding. "Not while she's with me." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the soldiers backed away, muttering curses under their breath. Their footsteps faded into the night, leaving only the crackle of the fire inside. Lyra's knees gave out, and she sank onto the chair, her chest heaving, her heart pounded in her ears, her mind torn between fear and something she could not name. Elias sheathed his blade and sat across from her. His face was calm again, as if nothing had happened. "They won't return," he said. Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but the echo of the soldier's words still clung to her. Spoils. Toy. Nothing. Her voice shook when she finally spoke. "Why? Why do you protect me?" Elias's eyes met hers. "Because you deserve to be protected." The word struck her harder than any blade. No one had ever said that to her, not even her own people. She had been a burden, a captive, a shame. But here, in this small house, Elias spoke as if she mattered. Yet fear still lingered. Her heart whispered that trusting him would be dangerous. What if it was only an act? What if tomorrow, He changed his mind. But another voice rose inside her, soft but persistent. What if it's real? That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind replayed the moment Elias had stood between her and the soldiers. His words echoed again and again. She is not spoils. Between fear and hope, she trembled. But for the first time, hope was winning. The night was restless. Clouds gathered over the hills and thunder rolled like distant drums of war. Lyra stood by the small window, staring at the dark horizon. Her chest felt tight, as if the storm outside had found its way into her heart. Elias sat near the fire, sharpening his blade with slow, steady strokes. He did not speak, but his silence was heavy, like he too was waiting for something. Then, as lightning split the sky, shouts rang out in the distance. Lyra froze. The voices were not human. She knew those tones, those cries of anger, her people. Her hands trembled. For months she had dreamed of seeing them again, but now terror gripped her. If they found her here, living under a human's roof, what would they think? Moments later, the door burst open. Figures stormed inside, warriors of her tribe, their armor dented but their pride unbroken. Their leader's eyes fell on her, and his face twisted with disgust. There you are, he spat, taken as spoil, yet you sit in comfort with your enemy. You shame us, girl. Lyra's throat tightened. She opened her mouth to explain, but no words came. She could not tell them the truth, that Elias had protected her, fed her, given her dignity. To them, it would sound like betrayal. One of the warriors raised his blade. Step away from him, come with us, or die as a traitor. Her knees weakened. Her own people, her blood, looked at her as if she was already dead. Before she could move, Elias stood. His blade was drawn, his body between her and the warriors. She is not yours to threaten, he said, voice like steel. The leader sneered. You dare claim her. She belongs with us. She belongs to no one, Elias answered. The words struck Lyra's chest like lightning. Belongs to no one. She wanted to believe that more than anything. But the warriors did not back down. With a shout, they rushed forward. Steel clashed in a small house. The fire roared as shadows danced across the walls. Elias fought with precision, each strike deliberate, his stance unshaken. But they were many, and the storm outside raged louder, shaking the house as if the heavens themselves watched the battle. Lyra crouched in the corner, fear clawing at her throat. Her mind screamed to run, to hide, but her heart could not look away. This man, once her enemy, once her captor, was risking his life to protect her. Leave him, she cried suddenly, her voice breaking through the chaos. If you must punish someone, punish me! The warriors hesitated, glancing at her. For a moment the fight paused. Rain hammered against the roof. Lyra stepped forward, trembling but defiant. I am not spoils. I am not a traitor. I choose where I belong. Her words cut through the storm louder than thunder. The warriors glared at her, but they did not strike. They muttered curses, calling her lost, broken. One by one, they lowered their blades. Their leader spat at the floor, his eyes burning with hatred. Then you are no longer one of us, he growled. Remember that when you die with him. They left as quickly as they had come, their shadows swallowed by the storm. The house was silent again, save for the rain and the crackle of the fire. Elias lowered his blade, his chest rising with steady breaths. Lyra's legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, tears spilling down her cheeks. She had chosen. For the first time since the war began, she had spoken her truth. And though fear still lingered, hope blazed stronger than ever. The storm had passed, but its echoes remained inside the small house. Rain still dripped from the roof, and the fire burned low, casting long shadows. Lyra sat near the hearth, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her body trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of what she had done. She had spoken against her own people. She had declared her choice, and now there was no going back. Elias placed his sword against the wall and sat across from her. He did not speak at first. His eyes studied her quietly, as if waiting for her to find her voice. At last, she whispered, I broke them. Elias frowned slightly. Broke what? My chains, she said, her voice shaking. The ones they put on me. The ones I carried inside my heart. Tonight, I broke them. She looked down at her hands, still trembling. But why do I feel so heavy? I should feel free, yet I feel like I've lost everything. Elias leaned forward, his voice low and steady. Sometimes freedom feels heavy at first. It takes time to learn how to carry it. Her throat tightened. Tears filled her eyes, but this time, they did not come from shame. They came from something else, something like release. For so long, she had been silent. For so long, she had been told what she was: spoil, captive, traitor. But now, she had spoken for herself. I am Lyra, she whispered again, stronger this time. Not spoil, not prisoner, just Lyra. The firelight flickered across Elias's face. For the first time, she saw a faint curve on his lips. Not quite a smile, but something close. You are Lyra, he repeated. Her chest warmed. It was strange how simple words could heal wounds no blade could touch. The next morning, she walked outside into the wet grass. The world smelled of rain, fresh and alive. For the first time in months, she lifted her face to the sky without fear. The air felt different on her skin, as though, the storm had washed away more than just the dirt of battle. She turned and saw Elias at the doorway, watching her. His presence was steady, like the earth beneath her feet. Why? She asked him suddenly, her voice carrying across the yard. Why do you care what happens to me? Why risk yourself? He paused, then answered with quiet honesty. Because you matter. Her heart jolted at his words. She wanted to deny them, to argue, to say she was nothing, but the chains were gone. She could not lie to herself anymore. That night, she sat by the fire again, but this time, she did not sit on the floor. She pulled the chair closer to his, her hands resting nervously in her lap. She still felt fragile, like glass that could shatter with one wrong touch, but she no longer felt worthless. I was given to you as a captive, she said softly, but you never treated me like one. You gave me food, a blanket, my name. You gave me back pieces of myself. Elias did not answer right away. His gaze met hers, steady and unflinching. Finally, he said, You gave them back yourself. I only reminded you they were still there. Her breath caught. For a long moment they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them, and in that silence, Lyra felt the last of her chains fall away. She was no longer the girl mocked as spoils of war. She was no longer the captive who whispered her name in the dark. She was Lyra, free, not because the world allowed it, but because she chose it. And she chose to sit here, beside the man who had seen her not as a prize, not as a burden, but as a person worth protecting. The storm faded, and with it the sounds of war seemed far away. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet house on the hill became something more than a shelter. For Lyra, it became a place where her heart slowly learned how to beat freely again. She still carried scars, inside and out. At night, she sometimes woke with whispers of fire and screams. But when she opened her eyes, Elias was always near. He did not speak much, but his silence was steady, a promise stronger than words. One morning, Lyra stood outside, watching the sunrise paint the sky with gold. The world looked new, washed clean after the storm. She felt the weight of chains no longer pressing her down. She was not spoils, not captive, not traitor. She was simply Lyra. Elias stepped beside her, his shadow long in the morning light. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lyra turned to him, her voice quiet but firm. I chose to stay, she said. His eyes met hers. You could leave. The road is open. No one holds you here. I know, she whispered, but I don't want to leave. The words were simple, but to her they were everything. For the first time, her choice was hers alone, not forced by war, not stolen by chains. Elias studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Then you are not my captive. You are free. Her lips trembled, but this time not with fear. She smiled, and the smile reached her eyes. Free. With you. The days that followed were different. They worked side by side, gathering wood, hunting, repairing the small house. Lyra began to hum songs from her childhood as she worked, soft tunes she thought she had forgotten. Elias listened quietly, and though he never said it, she could see the peace it brought to him. One evening, as the fire crackled, Lyra looked at him and said, "When they gave me to you, they thought they broke me. They thought they could take away who I was, but you gave me back more than my name. You gave me back my heart." Elias's face softened, and for the first time, he allowed himself a real smile. "And you gave me something too," he said. She tilted her head. "What?" "Purpose," he answered. "After the war, I thought I had nothing left, no reason to keep going. But then you came. Protecting you reminded me I could still do something good." Her chest tightened at his words. Two broken souls, both carrying scars, both finding meaning in each other. Silence stretched between them, but it was no longer heavy. It was warm, alive. Lyra reached across the table, her hand trembling, and placed it over his. Elias did not pull away. For a long time, they simply sat there, two hands joined over the wooden table, the firelight wrapping them in gold. Outside, the world still bore the wounds of war. Soldiers still called her spoils. Some whispered she was lost, others that she was a traitor. But inside this house, she was not a title, not a burden, not a shame. She was Lyra. And Elias was not her captor. He was the man who had seen her worth when no one else did. That night, as the fire burned low, Lyra rested her head against his shoulder. Her eyes closed, her body calm for the first time in what felt like forever. The war had stolen her freedom, but love had given it back. And in that quiet house, far from the battlefield, two souls scarred by war began a new story, one that no storm, no chain, and no enemy could ever destroy.